This is a recording of the article titled Battle Style Blunders. The Confederate soldiers squinted through the haze and sweat as sweat dripped into their eyes. Cannons boomed nearby and smoke filled the air. In the distance they could see gray figures. Should the rebels fire? The approaching unit carried a limp flag with red and white stripes. Was the flag Union or Confederate? "Who are you?" the rebels shouted. They were answered by gunfire. Why was this scene frequently played out at the Battle of First Manassas? Although the North and the South had established uniform regulations, it was not possible for an entire army to comply overnight. In addition, a standard military uniform took time to make, and since many people assumed the war would not last long, soldiers on both sides were not going to wait for a uniform to be issued. They were eager to fight and get back home quickly. Through most of the Civil War, the Confederate usually wore gray uniforms, and the Union Army wore blue. But at the start of the conflict, troops on each side came to battle in varying uniforms, because the first to respond to the call for soldiers were companies of militia and volunteers. They obtained their uniform from local sources, rather than from the army in which they served. So many soldiers arrived for duty wearing their pre-Civil War militia outfits. Others simply wore civilian clothing into battle. Because of constant supply problems as the war dragged on, particularly in the South, some Confederate soldiers even used the outfits of captured Union troops. The resulting chaos was a lesson in the importance of dress codes. To further confuse the situation, a number of Confederate officers wore Union uniforms. Just before the outbreak of the war, these men had been officers in the U.S. Army. When the Civil War began, they resigned from the Army, but continued to wear their officers' outfits, which were Federal or Northern uniforms. To encourage enlistment, some Northern units adopted Zouave uniforms, based on the Algerian outfits adopted by the French Army in the Crimean War. These were colorful and unique costumes. They included fez caps, bright baggy pants, and braided jackets with a sash at the waist. The Zouave units hoped to attract young men who wanted to march gloriously into battle. Unfortunately, some Confederate units had the same idea. They came to Manassas wearing Zouave uniforms too. The similarities between the flags of the two sides also caused confusion. With 3 bold red and white stripes and a ring of stars over a dark blue background, the Confederate stars and bars looked a lot like the Union symbol. In fact, from a distance and in the blur of battle smoke, few could tell them apart. Unfortunately, the lack of clarity over uniforms and flags had deadly consequences at Manassas. The battle was hopelessly muddled, leading to much loss of life. Afraid to shoot a fellow soldier, men often hesitated too long. Ashamed to hesitate, they sometimes shot too soon. Soldiers on both sides were killed by friendly fire that hot day in July 1861. At that same battle, some men were killed by outdated military concepts. Most of the fighting at the beginning of the war incorporated Revolutionary War-era tactics. For instance, long lines of soldiers rushed directly at the enemy because muskets had to be shot from a short distance away, within 80 yards, in order to hit their targets. The inaccuracy of the muskets allowed attackers to advance quite far before any bullets even reached them. During the U.S.-Mexican War, U.S. Army leaders had used this tactic successfully, and they expected it to work at Manassas too. Not long before the start of the Civil War, though, a new technique of manufacturing guns called rifling was invented. Rifled artillery and small arms had spiraled grooves in their gun barrels, which allowed projectiles fired from them to go 4 times farther than from the old smoothbore guns. Combined with the new mini-ball, which loaded more quickly and flew straighter, the new rifles enabled men to shoot more accurately at advancing troops and hit soldier after soldier. As a result, the old styles of military engagement turned disastrous in the Civil War. Although in limited use at First Manassas, those few units armed with rifled guns had a distinct advantage. Confusion and panic reigned as entire regiments were mowed down by these guns, located more than 300 yards away. Not long after this battle, Confederate generals chose a new battle flag, the Southern Cross of the Army of Northern Virginia. And gradually, each army tried to standardize its uniform. The Federal blue and the Rebel gray became official. In the future, there would be fewer moments of confusion on the battlefield. But it would be a long time before military leaders clearly saw that their battle styles were outdated. Until they did, masses of soldiers would continue to rush, shoulder to shoulder, into the sights of enemy riflemen.